Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Steven Schroefs. I'm from Fleet Europe. Welcome to this Fleet Europe webinar on alternative powertrains in association with G Capital. The information shared with you today during this webinar is subject to disclaimers, which can be viewed in detail via the recording of this session, which will be shared on fleeteurope.com. The theme of today's webinar is Alternative Powertrains, how to make hybrids fit your fleet. In 2014, the share of alternative powertrains in Europe grew, but only slightly compared to the year before. According to figures from Dataforce, it still remains on low levels, with only 5% for the private business and only 3.3% for two fleets. And although corporate fleets show big interest in new powertrain cars, different elements are impacting the possible success of alternative powertrains. For sure, there is the cost of technology and the cost of use, combined with taxation schemes and local incentives. The available fuel and recharging infrastructure also plays a key role. And let's not forget, driver behavior, of course, is also very important. It is clear that if we look at all the alternative powertrains, hybrids, full electric, hydrogen vehicles, that probably full electric and hydrogen vehicles are less applicable for every business driver in your company, so the exercise to decide on what driver fits what powertrain is more complex than with traditional ICE vehicles. But as said, interest is out there. And the category of vehicles expected to become a force to be reckoned within 2015 will definitely be hybrids. Not only continue the car manufacturers to expand their offer, but also in terms of use and acceptance, hybrids are the most favorable and easy alternative powertrain technology to implement in a corporate fleets today. At least that is what we assume. And in this webinar, we want to look with some experts if this is also the case in real life. For me, I wish you a great webinar, and I'm now going to introduce what you can expect today. So today's speakers, well, we have found two experts. The first one is Florian Waldegger, Director Global Fleet Consulting at G Capital International. And we have Gregory Bech, EMEA Category Manager Fleet of Johsnon & Johnston. In total, the webinar will take 45 minutes and it's divided into three main parts. First, Florian Waldegger will give insight in several key trends about alternative powertrain vehicles with a focus on hybrids based on an international survey GE's Consultancy division Key Solutions conducted last year. Afterwards, Gregory Bech of Johsnon & Johnston will explain how he and his company have addressed the alternative powertrain question with a case study on hybrids in the J&J fleet. The third and final part at the end of the webinar will be a Q&A session. As a participant, you are free to send your question for the expert speakers by using the chat function of this webinar tool. Please also indicate to which expert speaker the question is addressed. That makes it a little bit more easier for the Q&A. So, let's go with the first expert presentation. The first one is Florian Waldegger. Good morning. And Florian, you will tell us a little bit more about the survey you conducted with GE Capital International, and we are glad that you can share the main outcomes and results of that survey. So let me hand over the microphone to you, Florian.
Thank you very much, Steven. Isn't it difficult these days to take a decision, especially in the fleet segment? So many new technologies are coming up, but which one is the best for your company and for your brothers? Today, during the session, I would like to answer a few strategically important points. So, Steve, could you please be so kind introducing the next page? Thank you. As of the binding target by the European Commission, everyone has to take care of its package and to develop environmentally friendly solutions. And personally, I do believe we all have to do something about improving our behavior. Therefore, not only taxational changes forcing us to select greener vehicles, also OEMs, meaning car manufacturers, improving their product portfolio and have to commit themselves to achieving an overall average of 95 grams by the end of 2020. Of course, still 32% of their research and development budget is invested to invent new downsized and more efficient combustion engines. But also equally 15% is invested into plug-in hybrids as well as 15% into hybrid vehicles. This will help every OEM to achieve its upcoming targets and most probably ourselves to emit less emissions while driving a car. Furthermore, we see first shifts in the mindsets of people more towards smaller cars, also smaller engines. This is usually the case if you talk to people who have to buy the cars personally. But also the dedicated company drivers should change their mindset, and this is happening because of companies focusing more and more on their car policies, not only based on costs, but also environmental strategic guidelines such as CO2 capping. And as many companies already doing this and are glad to look into the future preparing themselves, it will be crucial to understand when the correct moment will be to introduce also the latest technologies into their car policies. Before going into the results of the research, please let me explain you on the next page what we have considered and how we were conducting the results of our latest benchmark about 2 weeks old. Together with my team, we have selected a wide range of available products coming from several manufacturers, from the typical German brands up to the Swedish ones and also some Chinese ones. All of them are considered. Giving you a clear picture of the true costs, we have considered all angles such as the initial investment, which is not only the purchase price, tax incentives or other components. For plug-in hybrids, you will need also a charging station. We assumed a rather small amount with only 2,116 euros. And before taking any decisions, you should not forget that a driver will need the possibility to recharge its car at home as well as the office. So most probably you will need even a second charging station. Of course, residual values is a key component on the monthly lease rate, which also includes costs like maintenance, repair, tires, and furthermore. Lastly, the most important component will be the fuel piece. This is based on the manufacturer average fuel consumption and the local fuel prices. As everyone has its own special deals with electricity suppliers, we have not taken into account any electricity costs at this stage. Meaning, if you consider the usage of a plug-in hybrid in your fleet, do not forget to have in mind further energy supply negotiations, the charging station infrastructure at the office, as well, finally, the recharging cost itself. To simplify the results and the overview, we have compared the cars segment by segment using the most equivalent traditional combustion version as well as the most fleet relevant combustion version. This allowed us to review 56 different combinations in which 95% of the hybrids are more expensive, between 10 to 15% on average. Let's dig deeper into the results. Stephen, may I ask you to flip to the next page, please? Why is it that plug-in hybrids and hybrids are more expensive? Shouldn't it be the other way around? Nowadays, still the investment is between 17 and 40% higher versus the traditional technology. Furthermore, the residual values are still very conservative, as no one does really know how the second-hand car market does perceive these costs. I will talk later a bit more about the reasons therefore. The fuel spend itself, surely the average fuel consumption claimed by manufacturers based on a harmonized test approach does look great. But what happens in reality? Do the drivers always recharge the batteries when it's needed or the possibility is given? Or does even just simply the plug fit? Do the drivers use the additional electric engine in the right manner, or do they play like Lewis Hamilton and Fernando Alonso when the light switching from red to green? Reviewing very detailed our customers' portfolio and working together with early adopters, we identified differences between at least 25% and up to 400% higher fuel consumption as claimed by the OEMs. This is purely related to the misbehavior of the drivers. If you would like to integrate the latest technologies into your fleet, you will need to invest also time and money to change the behavior of your company car drivers. Of course, we have identified cases where it will make sense to consider it as an alternative, which is obviously led by tax incentives. Will be the business case still beneficial if the government deciding not to support at the same level? Overall, plug-in hybrids and hybrids can be between 1 and 44% more expensive. I would like to explain more in detail how we came to this conclusion. Let's speak first on the next page about the fuel component. As explained before, the deviation between the theoretical fuel consumption and the realistical one is led by the behavior of the driver. I would like to show you the impact on the TCO. On the first scenario, which is based on total cost of ownership and manufacturer terms, already in this case the traditional technology is 9% less expensive. But as we all do know, also with a diesel or petrol car, usually drivers never achieve the theoretical average. So in the second scenario, therefore, we have added 10% on the fuel spend for both sides of the comparison. Stephen, would you please be so kind to introduce the second fuel? Thank you. So if we uplift the fuel spend on both sides with 10%, we can see a slightly beneficial move. Now the traditional engine is only 8% less expensive. In the third scenario, we have said before that we identified much higher fuel consumption. So therefore we have worked out this result. Adding 10% on the traditional version of a combustion engine and adding 25% on top to a plug-in hybrid or hybrid version. Now the diesel car is on average across Europe 14% less expensive. And this result is without considering any additional electricity costs which you would need to add on top. Surely we can see also differences between the vehicle segments. This is what I would like to show you on the next page. I'm guessing you would assume as bigger the car is, as bigger the difference will be. This is not the case. While in the mini city car segment, the plug-in is 21% more expensive. In the D segment, the diesel engine is between 8 and 10% less expensive. As well, in the SUV segment, we will face roughly 11% higher cost as on the plug-in and hybrid versions. All these results might sound very negative, but I already mentioned it before. Of course, we identified also possibilities latest technologies will make sense. And this will be introduced from me now on the following page. In the Netherlands, one of the most mature markets in regards to supporting environmental friendly cars, the Volkswagen Golf GTE will be cheaper compared to 2 liters diesel with equivalent horsepower. While the purchase price is 37% higher compared to the diesel one, the lower BPM has that positive effect that the overall TCO on the diesel car is 8% above the GTE. Also in the UK, the Golf GTE is the more beneficial car. The fact that the diesel equivalent is 4% more expensive on a TCO basis might be obsolete as soon as we will consider electricity costs on top. And by the way, the 4% are representing only 18 British pounds per month. Last but not least, the Ford Mondeo will be a possibility for the Swedish market as for now. Only 2% higher list price are going to support the business case. Again, the result does not include any charging costs. On my last page, finally, I would like to speak about the buyer considerations. Of course, we can see pros and cons. As pros can be seen the grants and subsidies from the government in certain markets. Of course, no range anxiety versus pure electric vehicles. Or the better fuel efficiency and low emissions. Very important to the drivers usually are the low benefit in kind. As an example, in the Netherlands, the impact can be 450 euros per month net. Parking benefits, of course. And last but not least, the exempt of congestion or LEZ charges like in London. Talking about the cons we have to consider, higher investments from up to 40%. Still the lack of recharging infrastructure and also the different plug systems existing. And of course, you will need charging stations at home and in the office. Still, very conservative scene is the battery and warranty risk we are facing, the limited access to workplace charging, or the additional cost of the home charging point. Summarise said we as Key Solutions identified business cases where it can make sense. But clearly most important, firstly, will be the change of the driver behavior and how to use supporting electric power. And if you as a company would like to introduce this new technology, you will have to consider several crucial points in your strategy, which will impact also the car policy. Thank you for your time, and don't hesitate to get in contact with me or ask any further questions later on.
Thank you very much, Florian, for your expertise and your presentation. And as indicated before, indeed, at the end of this webinar, we will have a lively Q&A session with our experts. And so if you have a question for Florian or afterwards for Gregory, please use the chat function to send your question. And also make sure that you indicate to whom your question is addressed. That makes it a little bit more easier to conduct the Q&A session afterwards. So thank you very much once again, Florian. Let's move on now to the case study. So I think it's great that we can move from the rather, let's say, theoretical part to a best practice. And Johsnon & Johnston, well-known pharma specialist, is at the forefront of many developments, and innovation is, of course, part of their DNA. Also in fleet management, innovation is important at Johsnon & Johnston, and so we are happy to welcome Gregory Bech. He is EMEA Category Manager Fleet at Johsnon & Johnston, and he will explain how his company and his team look at hybrids in fleet, and he will tell us a little bit more what they have done in the past and what they are doing today. Gregory, the webinar floor is yours.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you for Fleet Europe for putting this event together, and to everyone who's dialed in today. So as previously discussed, I'd like to present a case study on how we implemented hybrid and electric vehicle car policy into our fleet. If you can move to the next slide. Here I want to really start from the top, and Johsnon & Johnston has a document called Our Credo. Many of you probably have a similar document within your organization, and what I want to start here for is that Johsnon & Johnston takes this document very seriously, and all the decisions we make in our organization are very much based around this document. It doesn't just hang on the wall, and our fleet is no different to that. Many of our decisions, and all of our decisions actually moving forward, including brand selection and the type of vehicles we actually select, are based on this document. So if we can move on to the next slide, what I'd like to do is really pull out the section of the Credo which refers to alternative powertrains. What I really want to point out is, this document was written in 1943. It's very forward-thinking, and at that point there was actually a specific reference to our environment. The reference is there below, that we must maintain in good order the property we are privileged to use, protecting the environment and natural resources. So how do we tie this back into our car policy and our fleet policy? So there were some very important experiences that we had. J&J owns today globally over 3,000 hybrid and electric vehicles. We were able to reach out to our colleagues for advice and expertise when we were putting this together. This became a critical aspect of our decision making. And lastly, current hybrid and electric purchases in the fleet today were not part of any regional strategy in some countries. We also reached out to our partners in GE Capital. They were able to give us some more information on what Florian has just shared with you. They were able to provide us market information with specific information to our case. They looked at helping us build the senior management consensus and the business case we needed to look at hybrids and get these implemented. We used Florian and his consulting team from the beginning. Florian came to our offices and was involved in initial discussions. And they also validated some of the findings we'd found with our own fleet and our own colleagues. And what we did, very similar to what Florian showed you earlier, is we developed a list of pros and cons, however, of course, specific to our fleet. So if we look at the pros, what many of our colleagues found was the maintenance costs were reduced for hybrid vehicles. We got good consumption gains when used efficiently and effectively in the right situation. There's obviously a strong technical CO2 performance, so the CO2 performance on paper. A lot of the tax laws favoring employees, and in some countries also the employer, but in many the employees. They're very popular with employees, we found. And lastly, in the US particularly, the residual values perform better than forecast. Of course, with any pros, there's lessons learned and cons. So some of the lessons we learned is that the drivers need to be trained to get most effectiveness of the vehicle. They need to drive in a city environment and city conditions to make the economics viable. The actual fuel consumption remains the same as an equivalent EU6 diesel vehicle in the way we were using them today. The effectiveness of the battery is severely decreased in some models after only 2 years. And lastly, to fully roll out within the J&J fleet, we would need to invest in infrastructure, so either charging stations on site or at the employee's home. And then, I mean, we weren't just looking at the financials, so we had a number of other considerations that we needed to look into. Our credo expectations, as you saw on the first slides, the image of the company, for example, what the budgetary impacts of taking on hybrids are, the CO2 and the real environmental impacts, the territory and mileage of the drivers, the maintenance costs and the infrastructure of maintenance costs. We have a 7-brand policy as well where we need to stay within the 7 brands. The tax considerations for not only the driver but also the company, the infrastructure at driver's home and at the office. And the last point was the correct usage of the hybrid technology which is in the vehicle. So the key conclusions that we came up with after reviewing all of this information. Firstly, hybrids and electrics are designed to be most effective in cityscapes. The hybrids used in towns and regional landscapes are not cost effective, and they are creating a bigger CO2 footprint than the diesel equivalent. The driver behavior is key. Florian has mentioned that as well, and it also drives both the environmental and the cost effectiveness of these vehicles. And there's also questions regarding employee compensation, and this I just wanted to put in because it's something that is very difficult to regionally align, and so the employee compensation for charging at home must be looked at the local level. So after all these considerations, we developed a policy, we developed a business case, we took it to our senior management, and then the policy was announced. So I have no issue sharing the policy with the rest of you. Whoops. We can go back. So I have no problem sharing this policy with the rest of you. I'm not going to go through the points one by one, but it's definitely a policy that has looked at all the considerations, very specific to the J&J fleet, which I'll mention in the next slide. So we can move on. So to summarize, we have a credo commitment and our environmentally minded philosophy within the company. The senior management case study was built on experience, market data, OEM data, and a clear message. The corporate image is maintained by applying alternative powertrains but effectively. And lastly, ensure your case study is built, and your policy, sorry, is built on the circumstances of your fleet. J&J has a specific fleet, so make sure you build on your fleet.
Thank
you. I hope the information was useful, and if there's any questions, so Stephen will tell you how to submit some questions shortly.
Thank you very much, Gregory. Thank you for your insight. Thank you for your presentation. I'm quite sure that the participants, they have already learned a lot, but perhaps they have still some questions, so let's move on to the last part of this webinar, the final part, and that is the Q&A. So you can send your questions by using the chat function of the webinar tool, and you can address your questions to our experts, Florian Waldegger of G Capital International and Gregory Bech of Johsnon and Johsnon. And I made a little mistake in my introduction of Gregory Bech. Apologies for that. I mentioned that Johsnon & Johnston is a pharma specialist. Of course, they are much more than that. They are one of the most recognized healthcare companies on an international level. So just to make sure that the description of the company is fine. Thanks. We are now moving to the Q&A, and I see that the questions are already arriving. So I'm opening now once again also the floor to Florian and to Greg. The first question is for Florian. Florian, the question is, looking at the figures, alternative powertrain vehicles represent just a little fraction of the car market in Europe. Could you say, also based on the survey that you did with G Capital, that it's perhaps still too early to think about integrating, implementing alternative powertrains vehicles and also hybrid vehicles in an international car fleet?
Stephen, not at all. Just having in mind what Greg said before when Johnson & Johnson established their credo, I think that is a clear sign. And if you would like to integrate alternative powertrains, it will be more important to start soon. First of all, you need to prepare a clear strategy who will be eligible and also why and where. And then in the next step, together with HR, the car policy needs to be amended. So this will take a certain amount of time. But do not forget about the circumstances such as the charging points, the reimbursing of the misbehavior usage, and many other factors. So as soon as you start, as soon as you will be prepared for the future.
Okay, that's quite clear. The next question is for Greg. Greg, we have seen that you already have quite a huge number of alternative powertrains and hybrid vehicles in your fleet. There is here a question on the problem, the issue, the possible obstacle of change management. Indeed, as we are talking about a new powertrain, it can be that perhaps there is a need to train, to consult, let's say, the drivers. Can you give some tips for international fleet managers on how they should address this topic when it comes to adapt to this new car, to this new powertrain?
Well, we looked at change management in a few different ways. So firstly with our management, our senior management, where we put together a clear business case. And once we had the clear business case, then the communication came out to the rest of the organization from the top down, which clearly stated if we're looking at hybrids and alternative powertrains, then we need to take these considerations into account. In terms of the drivers themselves, what we have done in the policy is we've put in a statement saying they must undertake training. Firstly, they must undertake the training from the OEM. So when they pick up the vehicle, they must understand how they need to look after the battery, because that has a clear, result on the residual value based on the quality of the battery once we sell the vehicle. And on the other hand, not only for our hybrids and our alternative powertrains, we actually use an eco-driver training course online for all drivers across the region. They do the course once a year, and they have a reminder after 12 months. So it all ties back in together to the change management. They are going through that training anyway.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. Another question for you, Greg. If you had to do things over again in setting up, let's say, the approach and implement hybrid vehicles, what would you do differently and why? What was some kind of issue that you had where you say, if we could do, if we could repeat, let's say, the complete exercise, this would be something that we would do differently?
I think the exercise itself was quite thorough, and I think we did cover as much as possible. So I think the exercise itself was okay. But if I'm looking back retrospectively, I would try and start the process earlier. So I think all of us have some hybrids and some hybrid issues in Holland, and it's no different for Johsnon & Johnson. So I would have preferred to have started the process maybe 2 years ago, where we could have avoided some of the issues that we needed to resolve in some of those countries.
Okay, a question for Florian. Florian, you have done this study. You have quite a number of international fleet clients. What is your advice in terms of addressing this topic on an international basis? As quite a few elements, we have seen them, are locally based, like infrastructure, taxation, acceptance of the driver, the culture, etc. Is there a guideline that you have when you want really to approach this topic from an international perspective?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course it will be seen different from country to country, and markets like Netherlands will be early adopters as of the huge tax advantage we see for drivers. Therefore, again, from a TCO perspective, it needs to make sense. And as soon as it's more costly, don't approve the order. So my advice would be set up a clear car policy framework, such as Johsnon & Johnson did, and then review it case by case. There won't be as thousands of drivers who would like to go for a hybrid car. So for those who are asking for, make a comparison between the equivalent diesel or traditional engine versus the hybrids. Look at the TCO, do not forget about the additional costs, and then take a decision.
Okay. Let's see. I have another question for Greg. We talked about hybrids. Some people also want to know if there are other alternative powertrains that you are interested in and that J&J is interested in. For example, full electric vehicles. Is this also something where you did an exercise on, or is it something where you say, no, it's still a little bit too early for us, we don't see really a business case?
You know, the electric vehicles are quite specific, and simply because of their range. What we did do is the policy that you've seen is valid for both hybrid and electric, and what we do believe is the electric cars are probably more designed or more specific to the management fleet. So in the policy itself, we have the sales reps type drivers. They have a maximum of 20,000 kilometers a year with a classic hybrid, but for management cars, we allowed it to be people who live within 50 kilometers of the office. So their daily commute is up to 100 kilometers. And that's designed to drive some electric vehicle behavior as well, because the electrics are going to get you to the office, and some of them are going to get you home as well on one charge. So that's how we covered it. It wasn't specifically looked at, however it is part of the policy that we've already seen.
Okay, thank you very much. The final question is one for Florian. Florian, what are your tips and tricks for fleet clients wanting to implement hybrid vehicles in their fleet?
Yeah, obviously I do not want to repeat myself or what we've discussed over the last 40 minutes, but again, start with a vision, involve all relevant stakeholders from the beginning on, and set a company target based on you can then define a car policy in a business case scenario per driver. But do not forget about educating the drivers how to use the new technology in the right manner. So it might make sense, like as Johsnon & Johnson did, investing a small amount in the beginning into the driver education. But at the end of the game, it really will help you to save a lot more money out of the new technology.
Okay, thank you very much, Florian. Also, thank you, Greg. Thank you to our expert speakers, to G Capital for supporting this webinar. A recorded version of the webinar will be available in a few days on the website fleeteurope.com, and we would like you also to give your feedback on this webinar. You will receive a little satisfaction survey around the webinar. If you could please take time to complete this little survey and share your thoughts into what you would like to hear in the future, that would be really nice. Thank you very much. Have a great day, and I hope to welcome you at our next webinar of Fleet Europe. Bye-bye.